If you've been into games as long as I have,
It's been 84 years.
or you're a collector, you're going to own a lot of games. But despite the fact you don't yet own every game, probably, there are games that for some reason you've bought multiple times over the years. You do always have a good reason, or at least you claim you do. If you need help, here are the 7 reasons you own the same game twice. Or more. Back in the day, a game was usually a game. Finished, boxed, done with. Sometimes, most notably from the fine people at Origin, you got an actual boxed expansion pack. But usually they just took the cannon fodder route of chucking out a level pack and calling it a sequel. But then the Xbox 360 era came along and DLC started to be properly a thing, as opposed to just a medium for selling you horse armor in RPGs. To be fair to Bethesda, while that was their mistake and they admitted to it, they were responsible for DLC coming of age, with many games getting proper-sized story expansions, which, once organised into season passes, led to a huge amount of extra content for your favourite titles. It's not without controversy, sure. Many from accusations of stuff that apparently should have been in the base game being held back for DLC. But usually it's a great way for developers to offset the massively rising cost of making games, while giving us more of what we love. Why is this buying the same game twice though? Well, no, in itself it's not, but here's the thing. Often games are later re-released with all that sweet expansion included in the box. And thanks to the laws of physical retail, even if you own the original release, these Game of the Year editions get discounted as quick as any other game. Often to the extent that it's cheaper to pop out and buy that game than it is to just buy the DLC. This was exacerbated by another Bethesda mistake, at least from their perspective. The DLC on Fallout 3 isn't DLC. It's included on a second disc with the package. So even the used copies in CX let you play the whole thing. I don't think I know of another game that did this. Presumably Bethesda felt the few sales they would lose through the second-hand trade and lending would be offset by the number of people who simply didn't have enough internet in 2008. Usually though, it's just a code on a card you could buy anywhere else, as was the case with my most recent example of this, Borderlands 3. This isn't a Game of the Year edition as such. Borderlands 3, like a lot of modern games, offered to pre-sell you the season pass by buying a super fancy version of the original game on release. I'm a big Borderlands fan, the DLC on 1 and 2 was superb, but pre-sequel had massively half-arsed it, reducing the story DLC from 5 and 4 on the other two to just a single one for its season pass. With little information on their plans at launch, I decided to play safe and just bought myself a standard version of Borderlands 3 at release. A year later I played through it a few times and fancied another go. I looked at the DLC season pass and it was 4 story DLCs and still £40 on Xbox, despite the PC one being discounted quite heavily. A glance on Amazon though revealed there were some residual stocks of the original fancy release, which included that pass, available for under $30. So I got one of those instead. I have of course literally never touched the disc and simply entered the code off the included card and put it straight back on the shelf. Nonetheless, I personally own 2 boxed copies of both Borderlands 3 and Fallout 3, but your example could be virtually any game with a story released these days. What's old is new again. High-definition remakes have gone from being a fringe endeavour a couple of generations ago to being a very solid part of mainstream gaming. Why make a new game when you can sell as an established classic again after a quick spit and polish? There's certainly the odd remake that's a bit on the lazy side. The recent Kingdoms of Amalur one unfortunately appears to have fallen into that trap, something we probably should have guessed from the original being mysteriously deleted from Steam days before its release. Equally, changing too much can backfire. Blizzard came under fire for ruining Warcraft 3 with Reforged, partly by changing most of the gameplay, partly through features missing that they'd shown working 2 years earlier, and partly because they not only deleted the original, but force updated everyone with it to the new broken one. That went so badly they ended up offering blanket refunds. The middle ground though is wide. Vicarious Visions did a fine job on a pair of remakes recently, Crash Bandicoot Trilogy and Tony Hawk's 1 and 2, not only preserving the gameplay and spirit of their respective originals, but making them look lovely 20 plus years down the road. And of course, including multiple games from the series in a single purchase price. I'd love to see more from them, but it's not going to happen because they were recently closed as a standalone development studio by their owners. Blizzard. Not a great section of the video for those guys then. Equally, Saints Row 3 didn't mess with the original too much, just allowed new assets to shine in high definition, and bundled in all the DLC to boot, with the recent remastered edition bringing the game to PS4 and Xbox One, just in time for both machines to be replaced. We could have seen Saints Row in the previous section too actually, since Saints Row 4 got a typically irreverently named Game of the Century edition, which I did indeed buy, having not had the standalone DLC on Xbox 360. Sometimes the remake, especially of a non-story game, blurs the line between remake and sequel with new content. Rez, for instance, was an absolutely seminal rhythm action shooter from Tetsuya Mitsuguchi at Sega. He left Sega to form Q's Entertainment, and delivered a fairly straight remake of the game for Xbox 360 as Rez HD. He then left them in order to found Enhance Inc. and recently tried again. And Rez Infinite is where the line starts to blur. Yes, the main game is a remake of Rez, now in very high definition and with an astonishing VR mode. But the release also includes an entirely new, entirely 3D world called Area X that was never in the originals. And then Enhance blurred the line even more with Tetris. Can you really sequel Tetris? I mean, without changing it so much as to be unrecognisable as with the official Tetris 2 for NES, which is basically just Dr. Mario without Mario. So Tetris Effect doesn't, but instead pulls in Enhance's trademark rhythm action and VR principles to create something truly special. A remake? A sequel? Who even knows? But Tetris Effect is an absolute essential for anyone who even pretends to call themselves a gamer, especially if you have PlayStation or PC VR. Then of course there's the more straight re-releases, where they've done absolutely freaking nothing but dump it on a new machine anyway. Sega and Nintendo are going to be the biggest offenders here immediately, aren't they? The original Sonic the Hedgehog for Mega Drive gets around more than a joke I would make if this was a Yesterzine episode. It's on compilations for Xbox 360 and 1, PlayStation 3 and 4, on Steam for PC, theoretically ported but actually wrecked on Game Boy Advance, and even on the Nintendo Switch, which is especially weird, not least because M2 had already released a properly upgraded Sonic for Switch on the eShop. And yet the only re-release for the Master System version of Sonic was on the Wii eShop, which is now not available, and all you can do is play the massively zoomed in Game Gear versions on system after sodding system instead. Even Nintendo, who went to all the trouble of upgrading the first 3.5 Mario games when they re-released them on SNES as Mario All-Stars, then turned around and released them again entirely untouched from that on the Wii. So much so, that the expansive DVD storage contains literally an emulator and a SNES-ROM. A SNES-ROM that there is some evidence they downloaded off the internet, although I should say this was never conclusively proven. This was so lazy it didn't include Super Mario World, which they'd previously released on the exact same SNES cart, so it would literally still have been a dump the ROM job. Then Nintendo basically did it again with Super Mario 3D All-Stars, slapping 3 games from the GameCube and N64 almost completely unchanged on a Switch cart, mere weeks after people from the internet had finished a very lovely high-definition source port you can find on the high seas. There's also their version of PlayStation Plus, or Xbox Games with Gold, which consists entirely of unaltered NES and SNES ROMs, some of which at least have built-in cheat modes, and their previous virtual consoles, which consist largely of selling you the exact same tiny ROMs again and again for $5 each. Sega at least are usually a little freer with the changes. Most re-releases of Sonic 1 that aren't explicitly Mega Drive ROMs have at least added the Spin Dash, for instance. And if you have the Sega collection on PC, not only have you probably paid only £1 a game, Sega supported the Steam Workshop, so people have had all manner of fun altering them themselves. And actually, we can lump the mini consoles in here. They're basically physical retro compilations, usually with unaltered games. There's another copy of Sonic 1 you've all bought. Unless you have the Japanese version of the Mega Drive Mini, where inexplicably they didn't include it. The SNES Mini, though, represents the 4th legal copy of SNES Mario Kart in this very room, after the 3DS Virtual Console, the Nintendo Online Sub 1 on my Switch, and, you know, an actual SNES kart for SNESes. Sneezes. Snooze? Sometimes you at least get a freebie. A game packaged within a game, either explicitly or sneakily hidden. For explicitly, we can go Sega again. Sonic Jam was a collection of the Mega Drive games inside a new 3D overworld. Excellently, it went a little further and let you play the games in different difficulty modes and with enhancements. Other Sega collections have been a little sneakier. Sonic Mega Collection is ostensibly a collection of the 7 Sonic-related 16-bit games, but it has the 3 Sonic and Knuckles lock-on versions unlockable in it, and also Flicky, Rystar, Comic Zone and the Ooze, all games by Sonic Team and Sega Technical Institute, who wrote the Sonic games. The updated version for PS3 and Xbox also has 6 Game Gear games, but not the superior Master System versions of 3 of them, because of course.
I don't think you should drink that. It looks bad for you.
Nonsense. It makes me feel great. Smarter, more aggressive. I feel like I could take on the world.
Sometimes though, it's really very sneaky. This is the classic LucasArts adventure game Day of the Tentacle from 1993. You may know it from its enhanced 2016 re-release, and the reason I didn't mention that earlier is it fits much better into this section. Day of the Tentacle is the sequel to then Lucasfilm Games' first self-published adventure, Maniac Mansion. By then, Maniac Mansion was 6 years old, and of course out of print and largely unavailable in the pre-internet era. In Day of the Tentacle, one of the original characters, Bernard, returns with 2 friends to the mansion from the title, in an attempt to stop Purple Tentacle taking over the world after drinking radioactive slime. The plan involves using Dr. Fred's secret time travel toilets to travel back one day into the past and turn off the machine that produces the slime. An accident, thanks to cheapening out on the diamond that powers the machine, sends one of the characters back in time 200 years and one forward, starting an adventure that makes superb use of moving objects around in time and solving puzzles 200 years before the problem occurs. It's probably my favourite adventure game of all time. But this is not the list of Dudley's favourite adventure games of all time. It's here because in the present day section you can travel to Dr. Fred's son's bedroom, where there is a computer that looks much like a Commodore 64. Use this and you can play through the entire original Maniac Mansion game within Day of the Tentacle. Excellent for catching up on just what the bloody hell is going on here. One of the best ways of getting value for your gaming pound in the 80s and 90s were the compilations, where companies wanged some of their commercially successful games in a box and sold the whole thing, generally for about the price of one very new game. Or more likely, they threw in a couple of good games into a box and tacked on their shovelware bullshit that didn't sell the first time around in the hope that the halo effect of you finally picking up a classic would result in by default sales of the stuff they couldn't move, but needed to make some money back on. Then, somewhere around the dawn of the new millennium, the compilation went out of favour. I'm not sure why. Digital hadn't taken over yet, so presumably the distribution benefits still applied, but you saw so many fewer of them, barring some bundled HD remaster stuff like the Hitman HD collection. Publishers tended to rely on straight releases on their various budget ranges instead, and as the PC transitioned to digital at least a decade ahead of the rest of the market, even that rebranding became a console-only situation. And then in 2010, with digital distribution now king on PC and very cheap to implement, Jeff Rosen of Wolfire Games changed everything. The concept wasn't entirely new, but the humble indie bundle ran for a week from May the 4th that year and included 6 mostly relatively famous independent games for a pay-what-you-like price, with money split in a proportion the user could choose between the developers and 2 charities. It's a good old-fashioned compilation, really, but the idea was copied, both charitably and otherwise, pay what you want or otherwise, and indie or otherwise. It was immediately everywhere, and remains so to this day. Companies such as Bundle Stars, now Fanatical, Indie Royale, Indie Gala, and many others embraced it, not just for games, but all digital content like ebooks, music, and even game assets. You won't find compilations in the shops much anymore, but they're as strong as ever, and if you've been around them for a decade now, you're going to own 2 copies of a lot of games. And with most bundles offering a Steam, Epic or GOG key per game, I know I've given away plenty of spares over the years to people, half the time to give them no excuse not to try a game I like.
This is Lilith.
There's a few entries in this list that might count simply as games publishers are dicks. But this is the key one. Sometimes a game gets released on a system with exclusive content to that platform. If you're lucky, this is just Activision bundling some extra multiplayer maps into the version of Call of Duty on whichever of the console manufacturers has paid them more this year. Annoying, but not a big loss, and they usually eventually become universal. There are, though, instances where versions have had genuinely exclusive stuff, and I'm not even talking about, say, Borderlands 2's final DLC, Commander Lilith and the Search for Sanctuary, which, 8 years after the release of the game itself, was produced as a story bridge to Borderlands 3, only for those systems that were actually going to get Borderlands 3. Although, I'm sure there were people who bought a second copy of Borderlands 2 on those systems to play it. In fact, Borderlands 2 belongs in about half the list. The PS4 and Xbox One version itself being a remake or remaster, and also having the same issue with special editions I pointed out with Borderlands 3. Between multiplayer, remaster and DLCs, I own Borderlands 2 on Xbox twice, PlayStation twice, PC twice, and you could conceivably have bought it on the Vita and Switch as well for handheld play. No, sometimes it's a lot more cynical, and for that let me introduce you to Soul Calibur 2, the sequel to the Dreamcast fighting game that made everyone forget Virtua Fighter even existed. The failure of the Dreamcast moved the sequel from a planned transfer to Sega's Naomi arcade board back to one of Namco's, which freed up its home ports, and early in the European life of the PlayStation 2, Xbox and GameCube, home conversions arrived by Namco for all 3 platforms. And fans needed to buy all 3 of them for a totally complete experience. Well, that's slightly unfair. All 3 home versions included everything from the original arcade after all. But when they launched simultaneously on the 26th of September 2003 in Europe, each version also included a unique fighter for and based upon the host platform. The PlayStation 2 was perhaps the most immediately interesting, including Heihachi Mishima from Namco's sister series Tekken, whose latest installment at the time, Tekken 4, handily used the exact same arcade hardware as Soul 2, and who PlayStation gamers would have been familiar with from the port of Tekken 4, which had been a PlayStation exclusive the previous year. The Xbox choice was obviously trickier. The Xbox was Microsoft's first console and was barely a year old in Europe, so it didn't exactly have a deep lineup of characters to choose from. I'm always personally slightly sad they didn't go with Abe from the Oddworld games, Munch's Odyssey being a launch title for the machine here. Instead, they went for Marvel comic anti-hero Spawn, who at the time had absolutely no connection to the Xbox at all, but had appeared in a smattering of games in other formats. The reasoning here might have been the release, 2 months off, of Spawn's own Xbox game Armageddon, and it shared the Spawn voice actor with that game. It may also be a legacy of the originally planned Sega Dreamcast heritage, as the Spawn game had previously been an exclusive over there. The third reason is the additional console-exclusive character Necrid, who appears on all 3 systems, but was created by Todd McFarlane, also creator of Spawn. The prize, though, was the Nintendo GameCube version, where, and I'd have loved to have been in the meeting someone first suggested this, the exclusive character was Link. As in The Legend of Zelda, Link. I guess given the later emergence of the Super Smash Bros. Series, this is now less of a shock, but back then it was weird as all heck, with this slightly less cartoony Link than you see in that game. It's the Cube game that's now the essential. A re-release of Soul Calibur 2 on PS3 and Xbox 360 a few years later ensured both major console families now had Heihachi and Spawn. But obviously not Link. So if you wanted the full game, you need the Cube and at least one of the others. These days, especially for retro games, a physical game can be as much a collectible as it is a game. Plenty of publishers understand that, not least the likes of limited run games, whose re-releases of games like Night Trap and Ground Zero Texas are done with an incredible amount of care, at what are usually pretty good prices considering. For those 2 I just mentioned, they even re-released the original Mega CD versions alongside fancy remasters for the PS4 and Switch. But it doesn't have to be remakes. There's a couple of games I own original era copies of at least twice. One, because it's one of my favourite games ever, and one pretty much because of the exact opposite. This This is Tiny Toons Buster Bust Loose on SNES. For a licensed game, surprisingly few people really know about it these days, and it's an entirely different game to the Tiny Toons game on Mega Drive. It's a lovely little inventive and varied cartoon platformer with all the style and humour of the seminal show. Not only did I pick up a UK box copy to go with my long-term owned US release, I even took advantage with an eBay snipe to get myself a Japanese cartridge too. I'm only ever likely to properly play the US one, being English and 60Hz of course, but that's entirely not the point. It's a game I have fond memories of over multiple decades now, and it's nice to know I've got essentially all the distinct releases of it. Equally, one of my more popular videos, and certainly one people keep bringing up, is the Yesterzine special where, rather than have 2 games, we had 2 magazines. Because Rise of the Robots was both the highest and lowest score in a single month across Amiga Action and Amiga Power. It's a great story as we track down which magazine was right, even if that answer is obvious if you know anything about those magazines at all. The Mega Drive and SNES versions are massively better than the Amiga ones, not least for fixing its most famous balls up. But I still couldn't resist the £3 cartridge copy of the SNES one I saw in my local CEX just as I finished the episode. Or the £10 box copy a few months later. Or the cheap boxed Mega Drive one on eBay a few months after that. It's one of those where seeing them makes me smile, so long as I absolutely do not try to play them. And finally, a tale of hubris. If you were kind enough to watch on What Should I Play SimCity, you'd know the version of the original game you want to play is Nintendo's excellent near-launch SNES conversion of it, with one of the most lovely relaxing game intros of all time. So when I was picking up a few more SNES games to play, I thought I'd take advantage of my multi-region capability to buy the Japanese one. After all, it's SimCity, isn't it? It's all symbols, how difficult can it be in Japanese? Oh, yeah. Because I forgot the SNES one has a lot of interaction with the mayor, modelled on series creator Will Wright. He does reports, he offers rewards, he panics at length about disasters. And I know this because having discovered all that, I cracked and bought an English cart too. Still, on the plus side, this is a great version of a better game, so I'm going to pretend it's just because I love it so much and not tell you about the screw up at all. Oh, bollocks. So that's 7 reasons you bought the same game twice. Can you think of any more? Know another distinct release of Buster Bust Loose to ruin my day with? Throw it in a comment and we'll all share our commercial shame as some kind of cathartic experience. If you want more, consider our flagship show Yesterzine, where every month we take an old gaming magazine and see what the passage of time has done to the games that were at the time considered best and worst of the issue. The subscribe link will pop up imminently. I'm off to buy 5 more copies of Rise of the Robots. Cheers!